I remember the smell first, the mix of oil, sweat, and exhaust that clung to everything at Debden. It was the smell of machines that had seen too much sky, of men who knew they might not see another sunrise. I was 23 and already felt twice that. The war aged us in strange ways. Every mission carved something out of you, something you didn't notice until it was gone. They told us the P-51 Mustang was the finest machine ever built, fast, elegant, with a range that could escort the bombers all the way to hell and back. I believed them the first time I saw her gleaming in the morning mist, silver like liquid metal, the kind of beauty that made you forget what she was designed for. But under that beauty was something restless, something alive. She vibrated on the ground, as if straining to break free, like a caged animal that hated stillness. That day, I ran my hand along her wing, feeling the cold aluminum beneath my glove, and I thought, this plane will either make me a legend or tear me apart. They called me reckless even before I'd done anything worth calling insane. I wasn't reckless, I was curious about limits, mine, the plane's, the rules that everyone else obeyed without question. Most pilots feared the dive. The manuals warned us never to exceed certain angles, certain speeds. The instructors drilled it into us. The Mustang's wings could shear clean off if you forced her past design tolerance. But combat doesn't give you time for caution. The Germans didn't fight by manuals. The Focke-Wulfs came down like hawks, engines howling, guns blazing, and we were always reacting, never dictating the fight. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to see if I could make the Mustang do what the Luftwaffe thought impossible. That thought began to eat at me. Every night, after the sorties, I'd sit on an overturned crate by the hangar, watching mechanics patch bullet holes and replace panels, and I'd imagine the dive, steeper, faster, lower than anyone dared. I'd picture the earth spinning up to meet me, the stick vibrating in my hand, the controls stiffening as the air screamed around the wings. I'd imagine the moment before everything tore apart and wonder if I'd have the guts to hold on. Some nights I told myself it was madness, that I was playing with death out of boredom. But deep down, it wasn't boredom, it was belief. I believed that if you trusted the Mustang, if you let go of the fear that bound every pilot to the safety of regulations, she'd carry you through it. The chance came sooner than I expected. It was late '44, over the grey fields of France, the sky full of contrails that looked like scars. Our group was escorting B-17s, heading to strike industrial targets near Cologne. The air crackled with tension. Everyone knew the Germans would come for us. They always did. Sure enough, someone's voice came through the radio, high and sharp. Bandits, 10 o'clock high. I craned my neck and saw them, Focke-Wulfs in formation, tiny black crosses against the sun. My heart started hammering. This was it, the test I'd been waiting for. I pushed the throttle until the Merlin engine roared like it wanted to tear itself out of the fuselage. The Mustang surged upward, light as breath, and I climbed higher than the bombers, higher than the 190s. The air grew thin, the world small beneath me. I rolled inverted, looking down at the chaos below, and for one long second, I hesitated. Every lesson I'd ever learned screamed not to do it. But then, I thought of the men in those bombers, the ones counting on us to hold the wolves back, and hesitation burned away. I shoved the stick forward and dove. The world turned into a blur of noise and vibration. The Mustang howled as gravity dragged her down. The G's pressed me against the seat. My vision tunneled. The altimeter spun like a mad compass, and the wings shuddered, metal groaning in protest. But I didn't pull up. I held. I let her fall. And then, through the trembling haze, I saw one of the 190s sliding into my gun sight. He was climbing to pounce on a bomber, unaware of the death screaming toward him from above. I squeezed the trigger. Tracers poured from the wings, bright threads sewing through the air. And when they found him, he erupted. A flash of fire, then fragments spinning away like sparks. I yanked the stick back hard, the blood draining from my head. For a moment, the world went black. When it cleared, the sky was empty, and my Mustang, God bless her, was still in one piece. That night, I couldn't sleep. The crew said I was lucky, that the plane should have disintegrated at that speed. Maybe so, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt awakened. I'd found something most men never find, a line you can only see when you've crossed it. After that, I couldn't go back to ordinary flying. Every time I took off, I could feel her urging me to push harder, dive steeper, trust her more. I started experimenting with different angles, different entry speeds. Word got around. Some pilots laughed, called me the Mad Yank. Others watched quietly, and a few asked me to teach them. I didn't teach them anything technical. There was no formula for what I did. I just told them, listen to her, feel the air, know when she's scared, and know when she's begging you to go faster. That's how the Mustang became a killer. Not because of better guns or faster engines, but because someone finally trusted her enough to dance on the edge of destruction. She was never meant for the cautious. She was meant for those who believed that sometimes the only way to survive was to stop fearing death altogether. Wherever you're watching this from, tell me, what sky are you under tonight? After that mission, everything changed. The briefing room felt different, the faces around me quieter, more watchful. Word spread fast in the 4th Fighter Group. Someone had taken a Mustang past her limit and come back in one piece. The crew chiefs kept their distance at first, like I'd brought bad luck into the hangar. They said the wings were never meant to take the strain I'd put on them, that I'd twisted the frame so badly it should have folded like paper. But when the mechanics checked her over, they found nothing wrong. Not a crack, not a loose rivet. She'd held, and that scared them more than if she hadn't. They started calling her Crazy Jane, and soon enough, every time I walked by, men would stop talking, pretending not to stare. You could feel it in the air, a strange mix of fear and curiosity, the kind soldiers have when they meet someone who's touched death and somehow walked away. It wasn't long before command took notice. They summoned me to headquarters, the CO staring at me from behind a desk piled with mission reports. He asked what the hell I thought I was doing. I told him the truth, that I'd simply stopped being afraid of what the Mustang could do, that we'd been treating her like glass when she was forged to fight. He said that kind of thinking would get me killed, and worse, might get others to follow. I didn't argue. You don't argue with brass when the war's still burning. But as I stood there, I could tell he didn't really want to reprimand. There was a part of him, buried under regulation and rank, that wanted to know if it was true, if the Mustang could really dive that hard, that fast, and live. I left the office with nothing more than a warning, but I knew they'd be watching me, and I also knew I wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, the missions grew longer, deadlier. The Germans were desperate, throwing everything they had left into the skies. Jet fighters, flak trains, smoke screens. It was chaos. We were losing men faster than replacements could come in. It was around then that some of the younger pilots started asking me for help. Not lessons, not lectures, just advice. They wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd managed to dive like that and pull out alive. I told them the same thing I told myself that day. Trust her, but don't fight her. The Mustang knows the sky better than we ever will. The trick isn't forcing her down, it's surrendering. Once you do that, she'll carry you through. Some believed me, most didn't, but the few who did started surviving more. They came back with stories of dives that no one thought possible, of shots that hit targets no one else could reach. One mission in particular still burns in my memory. December 1944. The air was colder than sin, and frost covered the wings before dawn. We were flying top cover for a bomber group heading deep into Germany. The clouds were thick, heavy with snow, and visibility was poor. About an hour in, a swarm of 190s tore through the formation, coming down like black knives out of the grey. The sky turned into madness, planes twisting, tracers cutting through the haze, engines roaring. I saw one of our new boys, Jensen, break formation to chase a pair of enemy fighters. He was too eager, too green. I could tell from the way his turns bled speed that he was about to get caught. And sure enough, 2 more 190s came down on him from above. I didn't think. I just reacted. I rolled over and dove harder and faster than before. The world vanished into white, the Mustang shrieking in protest. I could hear the metal flexing, could feel the controls stiffen under my hands. For a second, I thought this was it, that I'd finally found the point of no return. But I kept my faith. I felt her trembling like a living thing beneath me, her wings slicing through the freezing air. And when I came out of the clouds, I was right behind the Germans. I fired short, controlled bursts, and both planes broke apart almost instantly. I pulled up hard, and the G-force slammed me into the seat, my vision going grey. When I came to, Jensen's voice crackled through the radio, shaky but alive. "You crazy bastard," he said. "You saved my ass." I laughed, breathless, half in disbelief that we were both still flying. That dive, that kill, it spread faster than the first one. Suddenly the mad dive wasn't just my trick. Others started using it, adapting, improving it. Soon the entire squadron had a new reputation. The Germans learned to fear the Mustang's silhouette above them because they knew we'd come down harder and faster than anyone else dared. At night though, when the laughter died down and the base went quiet, I'd sit alone outside the tent, staring at the distant flashes on the horizon. I'd think about the price of it. Every new trick in war comes with a cost. For every pilot who mastered the dive, There was one who didn't pull out in time. You'd see the contrails turn into spirals of smoke and know another man had chased the edge too far. Sometimes I wondered if I'd started something that should have stayed buried in my own madness. But then I'd think of the bombers, of the lives saved because we learned to strike faster, hit harder. The guilt never left, but neither did the conviction that it had been necessary. By January, the Mustang was no longer just a fast escort fighter. It was a weapon of terror, a machine reborn through faith and recklessness. And somehow, I was at the center of it all. The brass stopped calling me insane. Now they called me the man who turned the Mustang into a killer. I didn't feel like a killer. I felt like a man who had seen too much sky and was running out of places to hide. If you've ever taken a risk that changed everything, you'll understand what I mean. If you haven't yet, subscribe. You'll want to hear how it ends. It was the winter of 1945 when everything came apart. The war was dragging itself through the mud, desperate, ugly, like a wounded animal that refused to die. We'd been flying almost every day, the cold biting through the cockpit, the horizon nothing but smoke and snow. You stop feeling time in a war like that. Days blur into missions, missions into losses, losses into names you can't quite remember. The only thing that stayed sharp was the sound, the constant roar of the Merlin engine in your bones. That hum became my heartbeat. Without it, I wasn't sure I was alive. By then, I'd flown nearly 70 sorties. I'd seen friends vanish into black clouds, watched wings shear off mid-air, listened to the hollow silence that follows a mayday that never gets answered. The men were tired, soul tired. You could see it in their eyes, that dull glaze that comes from watching too much sky burn. Yet every time I strapped into that, I felt the same surge I'd felt the first day I dove. She was my reason, my curse, my last sliver of control in a world that had stopped making sense. The brass wanted results. They wanted kills. And the only thing that kept us ahead of the Germans now was the dive. We turned it into an art, a ritual almost. The trick wasn't just about speed. It was about reading the sky, feeling the pulse of the battle before it happened. The Germans still tried to catch the bombers from above, but now they hesitated. They'd seen what happened when a Mustang came screaming down at terminal velocity. The first few times they thought it was suicide. Then they realized it wasn't. That's when fear crept in. You could see it in their maneuvers. They started braking early, avoiding the vertical, giving up the advantage they once owned. That's when I knew we'd changed the game. But war never lets you win without payment. I remember one mission like a scar. February, cold enough to freeze tears before they hit your cheek. We were deep into Germany, the target a factory near Kassel. The sky was clear at first, perfect blue, but by the time we crossed the Rhine, the flak was so thick it felt like flying through gravel. Black bursts everywhere, shaking the plane with each concussion. One shell exploded close enough to rattle my teeth. Another tore a chunk out of the left wing. I heard the engine cough, then settle back into rhythm. I gripped the stick tighter and kept going. You don't stop when the bombers are counting on you. You just keep climbing until your fear burns away. Then came the call. Eagles at 2 o'clock high. The 190s again, cutting through the sun like razors. They came fast, perfectly coordinated. The first pass shredded 2 bombers before we could react. I rolled over, the nose dropping into that familiar angle, and the world narrowed to a single point, the enemy leader. Everything else disappeared. I dove harder than ever before. The air screamed so loud it drowned out thought. My body felt like stone under the G-force. The Mustang trembled, her wings bending, the frame howling like it wanted to tear apart. I didn't care. I'd learned that if you hesitate in that moment, even for a breath, you die. The enemy must have seen me coming because he rolled to brake, but too late. My guns spat fire, the tracers slicing through his fuselage, and his engine exploded in a spray of sparks. I pulled up, gasping, the blood draining from my vision. When color came back, I saw chaos. The sky was a graveyard of falling planes, parachutes blooming like dying flowers. I caught sight of one of ours, Miller's Mustang, spinning out of control, black smoke pouring from the engine. I tried to reach him on the radio, shouting, but the static swallowed my word. He crashed before my eyes, a smear of flame against the snow. There was no time to mourn. Another 190 came at me head-on, guns blazing. I felt the rounds tear through the fuselage, one punching through the canopy, slicing the sleeve of my jacket. I jerked the stick, rolled, came up behind him, and squeezed the trigger until my guns went dry. His plane broke apart mid-air, pieces scattering like ash. By the time the mission was over, my Mustang looked like she'd been through hell. Holes across the fuselage, one tire shredded, The canopy cracked. I limped her back across the channel, praying she'd hold together just a few more minutes. When the wheels touched the runway, I finally exhaled. My legs wouldn't stop shaking. The crew ran to the plane, shouting, pulling me out of the cockpit. Someone said I should be dead. I just stared at the Mustang, her silver skin blackened with soot, and whispered, "You did it again, girl." That night, the officers brought whiskey, trying to celebrate. I didn't drink. I couldn't. Miller's empty bunk was just a few feet away. His flight jacket still hung by the cot, his photo of a wife and child still pinned above it. I sat there for a long time, staring at that picture, wondering if I'd dragged them into this by teaching him the dive. Maybe if I'd never shown him, he'd still be alive. Maybe the Mustang had claimed him as payment for carrying me too long. That's the part they never tell you about being a pilot. It's not the fear of dying that haunts you. It's the guilt of surviving when others don't. The next morning, Command pinned another medal to my chest. I felt nothing. Medals don't mean much when the man who earned it beside you is gone. The reporters later wrote about the Mustang's deadly new tactic, about the American pilot who defied physics. They made it sound like glory, but there's no glory in watching a sky full of burning men. There's only noise, smoke, and the terrible silence after. Still, the dive had become doctrine. What started as madness turned into strategy. We trained new pilots to use it, controlled descent angles, timed pullouts, precision gunnery under high stress. They called it energy fighting. I called it survival. But deep down, I knew it was born from something darker, from a moment when I stopped caring whether I lived or died, and somehow lived anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it again. That drop, that weightless second before impact, the shudder of the Mustang straining against death. It was beautiful and terrible all at once, like staring into the heart of something divine that wanted to kill you just to see if you were worthy. War turns men into ghosts long before the bullets find them. I think I became one somewhere in that winter sky, a shadow held together by noise, instinct, and the will of a machine that refused to die. Tell me, if you'd been in that cockpit, would you have pulled the stick or let go? I don't know if I'd have pulled up. The war didn't end with a bang. It dragged like an animal bleeding out, snapping at anything that moved. By spring 45, the skies over Germany were chaos. The Luftwaffe was desperate, throwing green kids into Me-262s and Focke-Wulfs that barely made it off the ground. But desperation can still kill you. We'd lost good men to pilots who had nothing left to lose. Men who flew as if they wanted to die, just to take someone with them. Every sortie felt like a gamble, every victory like theft. The brass said we were winning, that the Reich was crumbling, but from where I sat, strapped into that cockpit, engine vibrating beneath me, flak bursting all around, it didn't feel like winning, it felt like endurance. By then, my Mustang had changed too. The silver sheen was gone, replaced by burn marks, bullet holes, patches where the metal had been replaced so many times, it looked like a scarred body. She'd saved me more times than I could count, and I'd begun talking to her like she was alive. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe I just needed someone to listen. Every time I touched the throttle, I could feel her hum in response, like she understood. We'd reached the point where the line between man and machine blurred. She didn't just carry me, she became me. I trusted her more than I trusted any man, and that trust kept me alive when everything else was falling apart. One morning, they sent us out on what the CO called a cleanup mission. That's what they said when they meant something suicidal, but didn't want to admit it. The target was an airfield outside Magdeburg, what was left of it anyway. Recon said a squadron of 190s had regrouped there, maybe 20 of them, trying to make one last stand. We were 12. We'd seen worse odds. Nobody said much before takeoff. You just check your gear, climb in, and hope this isn't the one that writes your name on the board. The flight to target was quiet, too quiet. The sky was the kind of grey that makes everything look dead. No birds, no contrails, just the steady rumble of engines and the occasional crackle of radio chatter. I looked left and saw Jensen's replacement, a kid named O'Connor, barely 20, face pale beneath his goggle. He caught me looking and forced a smile. I nodded back, though I felt a pit in my stomach. The young ones always smiled like that before their first real fight. You could tell who'd make it and who wouldn't, just by the way their eyes moved. O'Connor's eyes moved too much. When we reached Magdeburg, the ground below was a patchwork of snow and smoke. The airfield came into view, half bombed out, hangars collapsed. But sure enough, there were 190s lined up like angry wasps, engines running. They saw us coming. Before our formation could tighten, they were in the air, climbing, turning, scattering to meet us head-on. The radio erupted with shouts, call signs, curses, orders. Then the world shattered into chaos. I broke left, dove, came up under a pair of 190s banking toward the bombers. My guns barked fire, and one of them exploded so close that shrapnel clattered against my canopy. The other peeled off, looping up and over, trying to shake me. I followed, throttle to the firewall, climbing until my stomach felt like it was going to drop out. At the top of the loop, he rolled and dove. I rolled with him. That old hunger kicked in. The dive was steep, steeper than it should have been, but I didn't care. The Mustang roared, trembling, the control stick vibrating in my grip. I squeezed the trigger, the tracers slicing through the air, and the German vanished in flame. When I pulled up, the G-force hit me like a sledgehammer. My vision dimmed, edges going dark. I forced air into my lungs, blinking until the world came back into focus. There were planes everywhere, Mustangs, 190s, smoke, fire. It was impossible to tell who was who. I heard O'Connor's voice on the radio, panicked, calling for help. I scanned the sky and saw him tailing a 190, not realizing another was on his 6. I shouted his name, but he didn't hear me. I dove again, straight down, faster than before, the Mustang shrieking as if she could feel my fear. I closed the distance in seconds, fired a long burst, and the enemy broke apart in mid-air. But O'Connor was already hit, his plane smoking, rolling, spiraling down. I watched him eject, his chute barely opening before the trees swallowed him. The fight raged for what felt like hours. By the time we turned for home, the sky behind us looked like a funeral pyre. We'd destroyed the airfield, but at a cost. 5 of ours gone, half the squadron. You don't cheer after something like that. You just fly back in silence, each man alone with his ghost. When I landed, I stayed in the cockpit long after the engine stopped. The ground crew came over, shouting something, but I didn't hear them. I just stared at the propeller slowly spinning down, feeling an emptiness I couldn't name. That night, I walked down to the hangar after everyone was asleep. I stood by the Mustang, ran my hand along the wing, feeling the rough patches where she'd been. "We made it," I whispered. "But what did we really win?" The silence answered for her. The next day, command called. The war was nearly over, they said. The German lines were collapsing. We were to hold until the final surrender. Some men cheered, others just stared. I felt nothing. The only thing I could think about was how many wouldn't live to see it. A week later, I flew what would be my last combat mission. No one knew it at the time. The target was a railway junction outside Leipzig, supply lines trying to move troops east. It was routine, simple. We'd done dozens like it, but war doesn't care about routine. Halfway there, flak ripped through our formation. I saw one of our planes disintegrate mid-air, another catch fire and dive. I dodged what I could, but a burst caught my right wing. The Mustang jerked hard, alarms blaring, smoke filling the cockpit. For a second, I thought I'd lost control. I could feel her struggling beneath me, fighting to stay alive. I spoke to her, actually spoke to her, telling her to hold on, that we'd done this before, that she couldn't quit on me now. Somehow, she listened. The smoke cleared just enough for me to see daylight, and I pulled her up. The gauges were dead, fuel leaking, but she flew. When I made it back to base, the crew was waiting. The Mustang looked finished. Holes everywhere, oil streaked down her side, the landing gear bent. I climbed out and just stared at her, knowing deep down this was the last time I'd ever fly her. The mechanic asked if she could be repaired. I told him no, she'd done enough. That night, sitting outside the hangar, I could still hear the echoes of her engine in my head. It wasn't just a sound, it was a heartbeat, fading. The war was ending, but part of me wished it wasn't, because when the war ended, so would she. And I didn't know who I was without her. Tell me something. Have you ever loved something that nearly killed you but couldn't let it go? When the war finally ended, it didn't feel like victory. There were no trumpets, no glory, no sense of relief, just silence, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you realize how much noise had been holding you together. We came back to Debden, but it wasn't the same airfield anymore. The hangars were half empty, the laughter gone, the smell of fuel and sweat fading into the damp English air. The men who'd made it home were ghosts of who they'd been. We'd walk past each other in the mess hall, nodding, eyes never quite meeting. Too many faces missing, too many bunks left unclaimed. That's when it hit me. The war hadn't ended. It had just moved inside us. My Mustang didn't fly again. They stripped her for parts a week after my last mission, melted her down for scrap. I didn't watch. I couldn't. It felt like watching someone you loved be buried without a name. Every time I passed the hangar, I'd feel that same emptiness clawing at me. They told me I should be proud, that I'd helped change air combat forever, that the dive had become a defining tactic for the new age of aviation. But pride's a strange thing when it's built on loss. For every pilot who mastered the dive, there were others who didn't come back. For every kill we claimed, there was a parachute that never opened. I started wondering if I'd created something heroic or something cursed. When I finally shipped home, I thought the quiet would save me. I imagined I'd sleep again, that the sky would finally stop following me. But it doesn't work that way. The war comes with you. You carry it in your chest like shrapnel that never works its way out. At first, I tried to live normal, bought a small house near Chicago, worked at an aircraft factory, married a girl who wrote me letters during the war. She was patient, kind, and I loved her in the only way a man like me could, carefully, like touching something fragile. But at night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing the whistle of air screaming past the cockpit, the rattle of gunfire, the sudden silence when another voice cut out over the radio. I'd reach for her hand and feel her breathing, steady, peaceful, and wonder why I still felt like the papers called us heroes. They wrote about the Mustang as a symbol of American ingenuity, of courage in the sky. They said we changed the course of history. Maybe they were right. But sitting alone in my kitchen years later, staring at my hands, shaking over a cup of coffee, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had made a bargain he didn't understand. I'd given the best years of my life to a machine, and when it was over, there was nothing left for me to give. Sometimes I'd drive out to the old airfield on weekends. The runways were cracked, weeds growing through the asphalt. I'd stand there, feeling the wind against my face, closing my eyes just to hear it again. The sound of the Merlin engine, faint and distant, like a heartbeat from another world. I'd imagine her diving again, slicing through the sky, silver and fearless. And for a moment, I'd feel alive. But then the memory would fade, leaving only the stillness. That's the cruel thing about surviving. You don't get to choose which parts of you stay behind. Years later, when the Air Force invited me to a veterans event, they brought out a restored Mustang. Brand new polish, perfect paint, not a single scratch. The crowd loved her. They cheered as the engine came to life. A sound that once meant war, now softened by nostalgia. I stood there among the other old men, medals clinking, applause echoing, and I felt tears burn the back of my eyes. They didn't know. They couldn't. That sound wasn't freedom to me. It was everything I'd lost. When the pilot taxied the plane down the strip and lifted her off the ground, I saw her silhouette against the sun, and for one brief second, I was back there again, high above France, the world falling away beneath me, the stick trembling in my hand. Then she was gone, just a speck in the distance, and I felt something inside me finally give. You learn, after war, that peace is its own kind of battle. You fight to stay present, to keep the ghosts quiet. You fight to believe that the world you saved still wants you in. Some men drink, some forget. I write. I talk to strangers who'll listen. Sometimes I tell them about the dive, not as a story of glory, but as a story of faith, because that's what it was, really. Faith in something beyond reason, beyond fear. Faith that if you held on just long enough, the wings wouldn't tear apart, that you wouldn't either. Now, every time I hear thunder, I still look up. My wife says, I stare at storms like I'm waiting for something to come out of them. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm waiting for her, the old Mustang, streaking across the clouds, daring me to climb back in and finish what we started. Maybe I just miss the sound of the wind screaming past me, reminding me I was once alive in a way I'll never be again. War takes everything from you, but it also gives you one thing most people never have, the certainty of knowing exactly who you are when the world falls apart. I found out who I was in that dive, and though it nearly killed me, I wouldn't trade it for anything. There's a strange kind of silence that comes with age, like the world itself has grown tired of shouting. It settles over everything, your home, your thoughts, even your memories. These days, when I wake before dawn, the house is so quiet, I can hear the ticking of the clock echo across the walls. It reminds me of the cockpit before takeoff, that heartbeat of stillness before the chaos. I sit by the window with my coffee, watching the light creep over the horizon, and for a few seconds, I almost believe I'm back there. The difference is, the sky doesn't belong to me anymore. It's just a memory now, one that never lets go. People like to talk about healing, about moving on. They mean well, but they don't understand what that really asks of a man who's lived through war. You don't move on from something that rewrote your bones. You live around it, like a scar that never stops itching. I've spent years trying to make sense of it, to find peace with what we did, with what I became. Some days it works, most days it doesn't. Sometimes I still wake up gasping, thinking I'm falling again, hands gripping the air, ears ringing with the sound of a Merlin engine pushing against gravity. My wife tells me it's just a dream, but it never feels like. It feels like a place I still live in, somewhere between earth and sky, where time forgot to move forward. After the war, the Air Force offered me a teaching position, flight instructor. They said I had the instincts, the experience, the reputation. I turned it down. I couldn't sit in a cockpit again, not after everything that happened. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something closer to reverence. I knew the sky too well to pretend it was just air and altitude. To me, it was sacred, cruel in equal measure. Every cloud held ghosts. Every gust of wind carried whispers of the men who never came home. I didn't want to fly over their graves pretending the war was just another chapter. I wanted to leave it untouched, a holy wound. Still, I never escaped it completely. Every few years, someone from the Air Force Museum would call, asking if I'd like to give an interview, share my experiences. I'd agree, though I never told them everything. They wanted stories of bravery, of tactic, of innovation. They didn't want the truth, that courage isn't glory, it's surrender, that every victory you celebrate leaves a part of you behind in the wreckage. So I gave them what they wanted, the legend of the dive, the killer instinct, the birth of the Mustang doctrine. They'd nod, record everything, and leave smiling. But when the camera turned off, the silence would settle again, and I'd wonder if I'd done the right thing by keeping the darker parts to myself. Maybe I was protecting them, or maybe I was just too tired to explain the kind of faith that costs you your soul. Now, as I get older, the memories have softened around the edges. They don't cut as deep, but they still ache when the weather changes. Sometimes I go out walking at dusk, when the air is cool and the sky burns orange, and I swear I can hear her again, the low, steady hum of the Mustang far above me. I look up, searching the clouds, and for a second, I can almost see her silhouette. I imagine she's still flying somewhere, beyond the reach of rust and time, carrying all our stories with her, the ones we told and the ones we couldn't. People ask me if I regret it, if I regret the risks, the losses, the madness that made me dive that first day. I've thought about it for years. The answer changes depending on the light. Some days I wish I'd never touched that stick, never tested fate. Other days I thank God I did, because in that moment, when the world turned into noise and wind and fire, I knew something pure. I knew what it meant to give everything you are and hold nothing back. That kind of clarity doesn't come cheap. It doesn't stay either. But once you've tasted it, the rest of life feels muted. I've seen men chase that feeling their whole lives, in war, in love, in danger. Most never find it again. I suppose that's why I keep talking about the Mustang, about that dive. Not because I'm proud, but because I'm still trying to understand why I lived when so many didn't. Maybe that's all any of us do after war. Search for meaning in the things that refuse to kill us. When I close my eyes now, I don't see the flames or the wreckage anymore. I see light, endless light, the kind you only see when you're falling through clouds at full throttle, the air tearing past your canopy, your heart beating so fast it feels like it's trying to escape your chest. That's where I find peace, not in stillness, not in silence, but in motion, in the memory of a machine that trusted me enough to keep flying when everything else wanted to stop. Sometimes I think about how quiet the sky must be now. Jets hum like whispers, their precision so smooth it's almost sterile. No vibration in the stick, no scent of oil or fear, no heartbeat in the metal. They've made flying safe, efficient, predictable. Maybe that's progress, but part of me misses the danger, the raw, trembling uncertainty that made every takeoff a question you had to answer with your soul. I don't miss the war, God no, but I miss the feeling of being alive inside it, when every sound and colour and breath carried the weight of everything you could lose. I visit the Air Museum once a year now. They keep a P-51 there, fully restored, polished so bright you can see your reflection in her skin. They call her Sweet Caroline, but to me she'll always just be her, the spirit of every Mustang that ever clawed through flak and flame to drag her pilot home. The young guide always recognizes. He's polite, respectful, eyes full of awe. He calls me sir, too many times. He asks what it was like, flying in those days, fighting like that. I tell him it was beautiful and terrifying, that it felt like holding lightning in your hands and daring it to burn you. He laughs softly, thinking it's a metaphor, but it's not. I walk around the plane slowly, tracing my hand along her fuselage, the cool metal smooth under my fingers. I can still feel the shudder of air, the violent joy of diving through the clouds, the silence after the guns stopped firing. It all comes back in flashes, the faces, the noise, the smell of cordite. I close my eyes and for a moment, I'm not an old man anymore. I'm back in that seat, the world rushing past, the sky infinite and unforgiving. I can almost hear the voice of my wingman in my headset. the static between words, the laughter that always carried a hint of fear. Then the guide says something about the Mustang's top speed, and the spell breaks. I open my eyes, and it's just a museum again, just a relic, just me. When I leave, I always look back one last time. The sunlight catches her wings just right, and for a second, I swear she's about to take off. That's when I feel the tears coming. Quiet, uninvited. I don't fight them anymore. They're not sadness, not exactly. They're gratitude for her, for the men who flew beside me, for the chance to tell this story while others can't. The truth is, the Mustang didn't become a killer because of me. She became one because of all of us. Every man who climbed into that cockpit, knowing it might be the last thing he ever did. Every mechanic who kept her running when the odds said she shouldn't. Every commander who looked past fear and believed in something bigger than safety. The dive wasn't madness, it was faith. Faith that courage meant trusting the impossible one more time. I've told this story more times than I can count. Each time I do, it feels different. Sometimes it's about survival. Sometimes it's about loss. But tonight, telling it again, it feels like a goodbye. The world moves forward. The planes are faster now. The pilots younger. Their wars fought in pixels and precision. They'll never know what it felt like to hold a stick that shook like a living thing, to hear an engine scream like a soul trying to escape the earth. But maybe, when they look up and see the sky burning gold at sunset, they'll understand a little. Maybe they'll feel what we felt: freedom, terror, love, all tangled into one heartbeat. I don't have much time left. I can feel that. The body fades the way the light fades from a hangar at dusk. Slow, inevitable. But as long as I can still talk, I'll keep telling this story. Not for medals or memory, but for connection. For the chance that someone, somewhere, will hear it and feel what I felt up there. That moment when the dive becomes silence, when gravity and grace meet, and for one breath, you are both alive and infinite. So if you've listened this far, if you've carried this story with me through the noise, through the years, then do one thing. Leave a like if you felt it, subscribe if you understand it, and share it if you've ever loved something that nearly destroyed you but made you who you are. That's what the Mustang was to me. That's what the sky still is. And if I close my eyes right now, I can almost hear her again, whispering through the clouds, telling me it's time to come home.